Stop the treatment. Give her body 1 week without any of his medicines. Winnie will come back to you, I promise. These words came from an 11-year-old boy named Emmett Kowalczyk, who was standing in a hospital corridor in Toronto in late November, wearing a cracked hockey helmet under his arm and sneakers held together with electrical tape. He said them to Lionel Ashton, who had built half the condominiums visible from Lake Ontario and whose net worth was discussed in the Fintel pages every quarter. Lionel stared at this boy for a long, suspended moment. Then he asked, very quietly, what Emmett knew about his daughter. The answer to that question would take time to tell. It began, as most unlikely things do, with an accident. Lionel Ashton had not slept properly in 9 weeks. His private suite at Toronto General's VIP wing had a view of the CN Tower, and he had spent many of those nights watching the tower's lights pulse in the dark while machines behind him breathed for his daughter. Winifred, Winnie, he had always called her, since the afternoon she was born, and promptly made a face at him, like she disapproved of everything she saw, was 13 years old, and had not opened her eyes since the 2nd week of September. The doctors called it atypical neurological deterioration. They used other words too: progressive, unresponsive, idiopathic. That last word was the one Lionel had come to hate most, because it simply meant they did not know. He had flown in specialists from Vancouver and Montreal. He had paid for consultations with neurologists in London and at Johns Hopkins. He had offered, through his foundation's legal team, to fund any experimental protocol that showed even a thread of promise. Nothing had changed. Winnie lay in her bed with machines timing her every breath, and Lionel sat beside her with a coffee he never finished and read her chapters from the astronomy book she loved, because someone had told him that hearing familiar voices helped coma patients, and he would try anything. His wife, Genevieve, came and went. She was 34, elegant in that particular way that made other people feel slightly underdressed, and she had been married to Lionel for just under 2 years. She had worked in pharmaceutical sales when they met at a charity gala for sick kids. Composed, attentive, surprisingly easy to talk to after the long numbness that had followed Lionel's first wife, Marguerite's death from cancer 4 years earlier. Genevieve always brought something when she visited Winnie's room. Fresh flowers, a cashmere throw, fruit arranged on a tray. She touched Winnie's hand in exactly the right places at exactly the right moments, and she had been the one to recommend Dr. Hollis Quaid. Dr. Quaid was the chief of a private neurology clinic and had impressive credentials on paper. Genevieve had known him professionally for years, she said, through pharmaceutical contacts. He had taken over as Winnie's lead physician 6 weeks ago, after Winnie's condition had taken a sudden, inexplicable turn. His protocol was complex and constantly adjusted. When Lionel asked questions, Dr. Quaid answered in complete sentences that nonetheless left Lionel feeling less certain than before he'd asked. There was a nurse on the night shift, a quiet woman named Bridget, who had worked on the ward for 11 years. She noticed things she did not report, because she had no proof, only unease. The new compound Dr. Quaid had added 3 weeks ago carried a label she didn't recognize. When she looked it up, the database returned nothing. She noted it in a personal file she kept at home, and she was waiting to decide what to do with it. Emmett Kowalczyk lived 6 blocks from the Ashton property on Forest Hill Road, though lived was a generous word for what their family was doing at the Willowbrook Community Shelter. The shelter occupied a converted church hall with tall windows and radiators that clanked through the night like old men arguing. Emmett's father, Bogdan, had been a construction crew foreman until a beam collapse 18 months ago had broken his pelvis and left him with a nerve injury that made certain movements impossible. His mother, Lorena, drove a school bus during the day and took accounting courses online after midnight. They were waiting, as Bogdan put it, for the bottom to become the ground again. Emmett was 11 and had his father's dark eyebrows and his mother's habit of noticing details other people missed. He was in grade 6 at Fernwood Public School on an academic scholarship, and he collected returnable bottles on the route between school and the shelter every afternoon because the deposit money bought bread and the exercise helped him think. He was not miserable. He had decided, at around age 9, that being miserable was a full-time occupation that conflicted with other things he wanted to do, like learning how to fix bicycle chains and understanding how black holes worked. The Ashton property backed onto a laneway where Emmett made his returnable rounds. He had seen the house many times without much interest, a Victorian limestone manor with a copper roof and high hedges, until one Thursday in August when he reached into a recycling bin and heard distinctly someone crying. The sound came from the other side of the hedge. Emmett stood still and listened. It wasn't a child's helpless crying. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they are trying very hard not to be heard. He found a gap where a board in the wooden boundary fence had warped loose, and he looked through without thinking much about whether he should. A girl sat on a stone bench near a garden fountain, her knees pulled to her chest, a book pressed flat against her shins. She had light brown hair and wore a yellow raincoat even though it wasn't raining. When she looked up and saw Emmett's eye in the gap, she did not run. She stared at him for a moment, then said, "If you're going to look, you might as well come in." Emmett was not someone who did things halfway. He came in. Her name was Winnie Ashton, and she was 13 and funny in a dry, sideways way that Emmett appreciated immediately. She told him she wasn't crying because she was sad. Exactly. She was crying because her tutor had moved to Calgary and no one had found a replacement yet. And she was bored in a way that felt like something pressing against her from inside. She wasn't allowed to go to regular school. Her father worried. Her stepmother Genevieve managed the household schedule and kept the days very organized, which Winnie described with a particular look that communicated everything Emmett needed to know. They talked for almost an hour. Winnie knew an extraordinary amount about astronomy, planetary geology, and the life cycles of stars, and she shared this information the way some people share food, readily, without measuring it. Emmett told her about returnable bottles and black holes and the particular physics of bicycle gears. She laughed twice in a way that sounded like she hadn't expected to. Before he left, he asked the name of the orange tabby cat that had come to sit between them on the bench. "Admiral," Winnie said. "He belongs to the gardener, Mr. Petrov, but he mostly does what he wants. You can say hello through the fence if he's out when you pass." Emmett started passing the fence every Thursday. Sometimes Winnie was there, sometimes she wasn't. They developed a signal. A red clay pot left on the stone wall meant she was free to talk. They had 6 or 7 of these afternoons before September arrived. In the last week of August, Emmett noticed Winnie was moving more carefully than before, as though she wasn't quite sure where her feet would land. She said she had headaches. She said Dr. Quaid had given her a new supplement regimen. She held up a bottle and made a face about the taste. 2 weeks into September, the red pot disappeared from the wall and never came back. Emmett heard about Winnie the way he heard most things, from pieces of other people's conversations assembling themselves around him. A woman on the shelter's landline, a headline on someone's phone screen on the bus, Lionel Ashton's daughter, 13, in a coma of unknown origin. He stood in the shelter hallway with a bag of returned cans and felt something inside him rearrange. Getting into Toronto General's private floor was not simple. Emmett spent 3 days thinking about it before he went, and when he went, he brought a handwritten card and a bundle of grocery store carnations he'd bought with deposit money. He told a distracted volunteer at the front desk that he was delivering get-well flowers from Winnie's geography class. He wore his cleanest shirt. He made sure to look like someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be. The private wing on the 14th floor was quieter than the rest of the hospital. Emmett passed a nurse's station, where 2 staff members were looking at a monitor together, and he walked straight as a ruler until he found the room number he'd memorized from the admissions directory in the lobby. Outside it sat a security guard who looked up from his phone. "Delivery from her classmates," Emmett said. He held up the flowers and the card. "Mrs. Pollard at Westmount Academy asked me to drop these off." The guard looked at the flowers, looked at the card, looked at Emmett's face. Something in the combination, the honest nervousness, the earnest carnations, the handwritten envelope, made him decide this was not the kind of threat his job was about. "Her dad's in a meeting, stepmother's downstairs at the cafe, nurse is inside." "I won't be long," Emmett said. The nurse opened the door, heard the flower explanation, waved him toward the bedside table, and left to answer a pager before the door had fully closed. Emmett stood alone in the room with Winnie. She looked smaller than he remembered, and pale in a way that didn't match her. like a photograph that had been left in the sun. The machines around her were doing all the loud work her body had stopped doing on its own. He set the flowers on the windowsill and pulled the chair close and sat down. "Hey," he said. "It's Emmett. From the fence." He paused. "Admiral came to the Gap last week. I brought him a piece of the tuna from my lunch. He ate it very seriously, the way he does everything." He looked at her hands, which were very still against the blanket. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I thought you should know someone's checking on him." He sat with her for a few minutes more. He was about to leave when the door opened. It was not the nurse. Genevieve Ashton came in first, pulling off her scarf, followed by a tall man in a white coat whose face wore the practiced calm of someone who spent a lot of time being the most intelligent person in a room. Emmett looked around in one smooth motion and slid behind the long privacy curtain in the far corner just before they turned from the doorway. He did not decide to stay and listen. It happened the way certain decisions happen. By not moving, he was already in the middle of it. Genevieve was speaking, low and taut. Lionel asked to see the updated charts. He wants to review everything himself. He's asking about the dosage increases. The man, Dr. Quaid, made a sound like a patient teacher. "That's expected." He's grasping. "It doesn't change anything, Genevieve. The compound is undetectable after 48 hours. Standard testing finds nothing. What he'll see is a documented deterioration in an unprecedented case." He moved toward Winnie's IV line. "We'll proceed with today's dose. The central port, not the peripheral line." "He mentioned bringing in someone from Sick Kids," Genevieve said. "A specialist he knows, personally." "Then we have a timeline." Dr. Quaid's voice was entirely level. "The medical power of attorney transfer moves forward this week. Once that's in place, you become her primary decision-maker. The Vermont facility is ready to receive her." He paused. "After that, it's a matter of time. Without the doses, her system will slowly clear. Whether it clears fully at this stage, the neurological damage is likely significant, even if she survives." "And if she survives impaired," Genevieve said. "Then she is incapacitated, and you administer the estate until she turns 25. If she reaches it." He removed a small vial from his coat pocket. "Lionel's prenuptial agreement excludes you from direct inheritance. This is the only route. 2 years of groundwork, Genevieve. We are not stopping now." Genevieve took the vial and moved toward the bed. Emmett came out from behind the curtain. He did not plan what he said. It came from somewhere below, thought, the same place that had sent him through the fence gap in August. "Stop. Don't touch her." They turned. Genevieve's face moved through surprise to something much colder, very quickly. Dr. Quaid simply looked at him, the way someone looks at a problem they are already calculating how to solve. "Who are you?" Genevieve said. It was not a question. "I'm Winnie's friend," Emmett said. "I heard everything." Dr. Quaid stepped between Emmett and the door with the easy authority of someone who had navigated difficult rooms before. "You're trespassing in a private medical facility. You've badly misunderstood a clinical conversation. What I'd suggest—" "You said the compound is undetectable after 48 hours, Emmett said. His voice was very steady, which surprised him. "You said it mimics neurological deterioration. You said the Vermont facility is ready. You talked about the trust and the prenuptial agreement." He paused. "Did I misunderstand any of that?" The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. "Genevieve," Dr. Quaid said quietly, "call security. Report a trespassing youth attempting to steal medication." Emmett said, "Before you do that, I should tell you I recorded this room." He said it because he had no other card. His phone was a second-hand model with a cracked screen that he used mainly for bus schedules and his mother's texts. But the word "recorded" landed like a stone in still water, and both of them felt the rings of it spread. "You're bluffing," Genevieve said. "Maybe," said Emmett, "but the file is already uploaded. If I don't send a specific text to my contact in the next 15 minutes, everything goes to the police and to Mr. Ashton." He held Dr. Quaid's gaze. "You said the compound disappears in 48 hours. Whatever you just gave her, that clock is running. Do you want to find out whether Toronto police move faster than 48 hours? Dr. Quaid and Genevieve looked at each other. Some kind of arithmetic was happening in both of them. "Give me the vial," Emmett said. "Walk out of this room, and don't come near Winnie again." Genevieve set the vial on the side table. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she said. "I know exactly who you are," Emmett said. "You hurt someone who couldn't fight back. For money." They left. When the door closed, Emmett's hands started shaking. He stood alone in the room for a moment, listening to the machines, listening to his own breathing. Then he photographed the vial from 6 angles with his cracked screen phone, capturing every line of text on the label. He sent the photos to his science teacher at Fernwood, Mrs. Kaminska, who had a PhD in biochemistry and was the most rigorous person Emmett knew. Then he went to find Lionel Ashton. Mrs. Kaminska called him back within 30 minutes. She had identified the compound class from the label nomenclature, a synthetic neuroprepressant agent with no approved clinical standing in Canada, linked to a research protocol that had been suspended. She was calling the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario while they spoke. She told Emmett to stay exactly where he was. Emmett did not stay. He went outside. He found Lionel stepping out of a black SUV near the main entrance, accompanied by 2 people who carried the look of lawyers. Lionel Ashton in person was taller than photographs suggested, with the posture of someone who had spent decades making decisions and bore their weight in his shoulders. His face looked like it hadn't rested in a very long time. "Mr. Ashton," Emmett said. One of the security men moved toward him. Lionel held up a hand. "My name is Emmett Kowalczyk. I think your wife and Dr. Quaid have been poisoning Winnie." He said it plainly, because there was no version of this sentence that wasn't a shock, and plain was the fastest route through it. Lionel looked at him for a long moment. His face did not change. "That's an extraordinary accusation," he said. "I know. I have photographs of a compound they were about to administer to her central line. My teacher identified it. It's not approved. I heard them discussing the medical power of attorney, a facility in Vermont, the prenuptial clause." He paused. "And I know Winnie. We used to talk through the fence on Forest Hill Road. I know about Admiral, the orange tabby that belongs to your gardener, Mr. Petrov. I know she was reading about Io's volcanic surface the last time I saw her. I know she cried the day her tutor left for Calgary and didn't want anyone to notice. She was getting better every time we talked. Then she started the supplements Dr. Quaid recommended, and she got worse in a specific way. Her coordination first, then her concentration, and she said they tasted like metal. I didn't understand what that meant until today." Lionel was very still. "Admiral," he said finally, and his voice broke on the word, barely. He cleared his throat. "She named that cat Admiral because she said he had the bearing of a naval officer." He looked at Emmett with something opening behind his eyes that had been shut for a long time. "She never told me about a friend from the fence." "She was worried you'd worry," Emmett said. Lionel made one phone call, then he said, "Come with me." The next 4 hours moved in the stretched, hyper-detailed way of hours that matter. Lionel brought in a toxicologist from the university and had Winnie's blood drawn immediately for an independent panel. He called the hospital's chief administrator and his own legal team. He was informed, around 8 in the evening, that Dr. Quaid had been located at Pearson Airport attempting to board a flight to Newark with a carry-on bag that contained a considerable amount of cash. Genevieve was not at the house, not at any of the properties, and her phone had been turned off. The blood panel found 3 compounds, 2 of which were not in Winnie's documented treatment protocol. One matched the agent in Emmett's photograph precisely. Dr. Evander, the neurologist brought in to replace Dr. Quaid, reviewed the full treatment history and spent 20 minutes not speaking. Then he said that much of what had appeared to be neurological deterioration was consistent with chemically induced suppression, not permanent damage, in his professional opinion, but a sustained interference with normal neural function. If the compounds were removed and her system supported through clearance, the likelihood of genuine recovery was considerably better than what they had been told. Lionel sat down in the chair beside Winnie's bed and held his face in his hands for a moment. Emmett, sitting in the corner, looked at the window. He thought about Winnie describing the surface of Io. "You'd need a suit that could handle 400 degrees Celsius and constant eruption, so basically the most hostile real estate in the solar system," and the way she'd said it with complete delight. The process of withdrawing the compounds was slow and carefully managed. They kept the ventilator running through the first night, while monitoring Winnie's brain activity. Emmett's parents arrived at 11. Lorena sat beside her son in the family waiting area, and Bogdan, who had taken a taxi despite the expense, put his arm around Emmett and did not say anything, because sometimes that is exactly the right thing. Around 3 in the morning, something shifted on Winnie's monitors. Dr. Evander described it as increased cortical activity, a phrase that meant very little on its own, but landed in the room like a first clear signal from deep space. He reduced the ventilator support. Winnie's chest continued to rise and fall with its own authority. "She's working for it," the respiratory technician said. By 5 in the morning, they removed the breathing tube. The room was very quiet in the seconds after. Winnie's throat moved. She inhaled on her own, imperfect, a little ragged, but entirely hers. The monitor lines steadied. Lionel had her hand, and he was talking to her in a low voice, just her name and variations of it, the way fathers talk to children they have carried since those children were very small. Winnie's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, moving through the light of the room like someone surfacing from a very long depth. Then they settled, on Lionel's face first. Then, tracking slowly across the room, on Emmett, sitting in his corner with his cracked screen, phone and his electrical tape sneakers and a hospital blanket someone had brought him. Her lips formed a word. Emmett leaned forward. "Admiral," she said. He laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out jagged with relief and exhaustion and everything else. "He's fine," Emmett said. "Still does everything very seriously." She smiled. It was the same smile from August, sideways, dry, landing slightly later than you expected it. And Lionel made a sound beside her that was not quite a word, and pressed her hand between both of his, and did not try to speak for a long moment. Genevieve was found 3 days later at a property in Prince Edward County, purchased under a corporate name. Lionel's lawyers were only now unraveling. She was arrested in the driveway. Dr. Quaid was already cooperating with the College of Physicians and Surgeons and facing criminal charges in 2 provinces. Investigators identified 2 other patients whose cases were being re-examined. Winnie spent 3 weeks in hospital and came home in October. Her recovery was not a straight line. There were days when fatigue settled into her bones, days when her concentration wandered and frustrated her. She pushed through them the way she pushed through everything, with a determination that made her physiotherapist shake her head in admiring exasperation. Emmett visited twice a week throughout. They sat in the garden when the November weather permitted and stayed inside when it didn't at the kitchen table over her textbooks, working through the biology and physics she was determined to complete before winter. Admiral sat between them and was removed from the table and returned to the table in a cycle that no one took seriously. Bogdan Kowalczyk started a building systems certification in November, funded through a professional program that Lionel had quietly made sure was accessible to him. The Kowalczyk family moved into an apartment near Bloor and Bathurst in December, 3 rooms with a real kitchen, reliable heat, and east-facing windows that let the morning light in hard and early. Lorena cried the first night, not from sadness, but from the particular gratitude that has nowhere to put itself and has to come out some other way. Bogdan fixed everything in the apartment that could be fixed within the first weekend, because that was how he processed relief. Emmett arranged his books on a shelf above the radiator and sat on the windowsill and watched the street below, where people were moving through the December dark, with their scarves pulled up and their breath coming in small white clouds. In January, Lionel called Emmett and his parents to a meeting at his office. It was the kind of office that made you understand without anything being said exactly what scale of resources it represented. Lionel sat across from them at a round table, and Emmett noticed it was round, which was not a coincidence. Round tables have no head. "I want to start something," Lionel said. "A foundation. To support children in circumstances like yours, Emmett, exceptional kids who get overlooked because the systems around them don't have room for them." He looked at Emmett directly. "I'd like it to carry your family's name alongside mine, the Ashton Kowalczyk Foundation." Emmett's mother made a small sound. His father looked at the table, then at the ceiling, then at Lionel. "That's not necessary," Bogdan said. "It's not about necessary," Lionel said. "What your son did took a kind of courage I've rarely seen in people 4 times his age." I want this foundation to find more young people like him and make sure they have what they need. Emmett looked at the round table and thought about Winnie saying, "You'd need a suit that could handle 400 degrees Celsius and constant eruption." He thought about August and the gap in the hedge and the sound of someone trying not to be heard. He thought about how the smallest decisions, to look, to go in, to speak, carry so much weight so quietly. "Can I help choose who gets the scholarships?" he asked. Lionel said, "That's exactly what I was going to ask you." By March, Winnie was enrolled at a regular school. Not a private academy, not a tutored program, but an actual school with hallways and a cafeteria, and the full noise of 400 students trying to figure out who they were. She texted Emmett at 7:43 on her first morning. "There are so many people. This is alarming and also great. More report to follow." He texted back, "Admiral would disapprove." Her response was a single laughing emoji, sent 4 more times in a row for emphasis. Emmett walked to his own school that morning through the tail end of a March snowfall. The kind that falls thick and soft and turns the city quiet for a few hours before everything melts. He thought about the year behind him and the year ahead, which was still mostly unknown and for that reason alone was worth being interested in. He thought about something Winnie had told him once, back in the garden in August, about starlight. By the time it reaches us, she'd said, "The star has already moved. What you're seeing is where it was, not where it is. You're always looking at a little bit of the past." The light was getting longer. Spring was close. Somewhere behind him, just out of sight, the city was waking up, and the ordinary, extraordinary work of things continuing was already well underway.